And we're back with a continuation of these tutorials on the river canyon. Now granted, this does not look much like a canyon, but as you may have seen in the most recent tutorial or videos, I have started to also work on some of the foreground imagery, and I wanted to focus a little bit on some of these trees that we will see in some of the renderings, right? So we'll have some beautiful background sky, we'll have some background mountains, we'll have some hills maybe in the foreground as well, or nearby, middle ground if we want to call it that, and then we might have an abyss or some grassy mountains in the front, some hills, and then eventually some trees. Or they might actually start behind the hill and we might just see parts of it. Right, so we might, for instance, have a scene like this, where we have also some particle brushes for grass. Let's grab, for instance, the oh so great baddie grass, and simply have the grass right here in the foreground. Or the tree might be disappearing behind a hillside, and we have just part of the tree showing in the foreground. Right, so whatever the scenario is, we're going to need some bushes and trees and shrubbery of this type, and for that we go to the OptiPostX particle groups, not the particles, not the bristles, not the orbicals, but the foliage settings, the foliage brushes. Make sure you enable that and pick what you like. Now I scrolled down all the way to the bottom here because there's a couple of willow trees, and those are the ones we're looking at. And I wanted to show you how to generate something like this, and then play some variants and experiment with this a little bit. In particular, the colors of the tree, of the leaves, or maybe the sparsity of them or the density of them. Let's go store this image. And by the way, I did create a image that's a little bit bigger than the default. My default is typically about 1024 pixels. I doubled it up, so if I look at the image info, I do have 2500 pixels here now horizontally, 1440 vertically, and that gives me a lot of room to grow these trees, right? So here's the thing, I'm going to clear that, and I'm going to set it to 100% and see what happens when I draw. Okay, so here we have a tree. It's very dark, very dark. And so the first thing you'll want to do is notice there are two types of shading. There's shadows and there's shading, and I wanted to compare those two. So let's do first without shading and without shadows. Right. And that of course will be very light. Okay, so that's that. Now if you're into pastels, that's perfect. Don't touch it, it's not broken. If you want the shadows, let's do the shading first. Okay, shading will definitely look very dark, and what this does is it gets dark if the trees or the twigs or the particles are moving downwards, right? It's similar to what you see with the particle brushes. When you draw the grass, the ones that are growing upwards, you see them lit, right? But the ones that are going downwards, they're dark, right? And so if you disable that, if you don't do the shading, they're lit the same all the way. But the moment the particles start going downwards, if you enable the shading, they start turning dark. And so if, let's say, you have the initial velocity a little bit higher, they shoot up higher, you'll see more of them staying bright because they don't come down. But the moment they start shifting to the left here and then gradually grow down, you'll see them getting dark. So that's the shading trick, and it looks pretty quickly convincingly realistic, you know, if you can combine that many adverbs and adjectives in one sentence. So what we'll do is we'll switch back to the foliage and do the same thing. So with shading, let's make sure we enable the foliage. There you go. Those particles that are going up are still lit the normal way, but the moment they're going down, they're getting dark. And the fact is, this particular tree, it's like the hanging garden of Babylon. It's everything is coming down here, so so it's dark, right? Whereas if you had other types of, I don't know, tropical, let's see what that looks like. Yeah, it's not that dark. It's thin in this one. The ones that are going sideways and down are dark, but there are some that definitely carry a color you can still see. Alright, so let's go back to our setting we had over here, willow tree. Here we are. So what do we do with these willows to make them look a little bit better? So we can disable the shading. It's a bit bright. Well, for some styles that's fine. That's what you may want. Well, let me show you another style, and that's by enable the shading. So now there are some parts that are staying bright and some parts that are moving down and getting dark. Right, so that adds a bit of, well, almost like depth perception. It's not perfect though. And we'll do a different type to compare. So let's do one this way, which is with shading but no shadows. Here we go. Okay, and now we'll switch. We'll do the switcheroo here. We'll go no shading but with shadows. Okay, give it a second or two and boom, something additional happened. Right? Did you notice that? Let me do that again. I'm done, or so it seems. Ah, now I'm done. Okay, let's do that again here. And what happens is that we get what we call the shadows. It's kind of self-shading. It's also known as ambient-occlusion based shading, and or shadows. So the environment, the color that you have, which is this white stuff here, this white background is imagined all around us, all around the tree, and it is what's casting the lighting onto that tree. Now, if you look into the inner parts of the tree here, there's too much shrubbery, too many twigs, too many leaves, too much growth, and it's getting dark. So there's very little light hitting it there. And that's what gives you that depth perception, which is so much better than if you have it just this way. Now, ideally, you'd do a combination of both, right? But that might occasionally be just a little bit too dark. Let's see. Let's combine that and see what happens if we have it like this. So we do have the shading as it's coming down, it's dark, but it really doesn't need it. It's a bit too dark here for my taste anyway. Now, you might adjust some of the colors, the tint, the ambient, and maybe give the ambient a little bit lighter. Right, and maybe that will help it, but it still is a pretty dark story here. So what I probably focus, what I'll do is I'll say let's not do the shading, let's just do the shadows and get that depth perception coming through with it. So what do we do with this? Right, so we have a tree here and we have another one here, and they look different depending on how quickly we stop. I don't have to have my button on the mouse all the way until it ends. I can stop, so we get some of these without any leaves or without any flowers on them. Or if I keep drawing all the way to the top, they grow. So one thing that would be nice is to actually capture one of those as an image, maybe save it as a PNG. And of course we need the background to be transparent. We don't want it white, we don't want it black, we don't want it any color. We want it transparent. So what we'll do is we'll actually tell it to render this with alpha, create alpha. Right? So check this option here. And now when you let go, you get the alpha channel as soon as it's done rendering that shading or the shadows. So at that point, what you could do is capture that, pick that up, right? If you look at the selection overlay alpha, indeed it turns pink. On the outside, it's not selected. On the inside, the color, that orangey color of these leaves is showing, and what we want to do is pick that up as a custom brush. So go to the brush menu and use selected as brush, right? Your current selection is this entire tree. Use that as a custom brush. The stuff around it in a rectangular bounding box container will also be picked, but it is flagged as transparent. Pick that up. Now you can go and disable this brush in the Octopus settings, and you can go to the regular brush here and store this, and you have a nicely stored image with transparent background, as you can see by the telltale plaid pattern. You can minimize that if you don't need to make any more changes to it. It's a nice little container. One thing you'll notice though is if you paint, first of all you may need to adjust the opacity, make sure the brush is showing completely as is, and then sometimes you need to adjust the shrink the alpha or do some corrective adjustments to it. Not in this one, this one's good, So this is one that we want to save, and what you'll do is you'll simply go to the brush menu and save right there. So you can save from the brush directly. Let's put that into the caverns area, or perhaps under 3D Designer. It's not really 3D Designer stuff, but it is something that we will be putting together with some landscapes pretty soon. So I'm going to go and call this one Trees Please, right? Trees Please. There, why not? And that will be tree number 1. Tree number 1, and we'll probably post this one somewhere, like on DeviantArt or something like that, for free giveaway. Tree number 1. Now, what do you do when you have a tree like that? Right. One thing that you could do is stamp it again. So you paint it here, you paint it there. It looks identical every time, though. Right? There's no variant to it. So what you may want to do is adjust the hue, make some of the leaves more green. I mean, like some of the trees more yellowy and so on. So, or even blue. So go ahead and open this brush, the stored brush again, and you'll notice you can adjust some of the parameters here, like the size of it. That's the scale. And so now we have a smaller version here. Let me erase this. You also can make it bigger within reason. You can also rotate it. Let's not do that, but you can change the hue, the saturation, and the value. So if you like it brighter, you can do so, and it's kind of a fiery tree now. Or you can make it more saturated, right, or less saturated, and reduce that a little bit. And then you can also adjust. Let me bring the saturation back to about 100%, and then adjust the hue. So that's where you get very different looking colors. Right. So perhaps you want a green tree, same shape, but green instead of orange. So I guess green is the new orange. So bad one. Okay, so let's see what else can we do. We have this tree here as a brush with alpha, and if we want to, we can save that. We can then also reload it, open it, but as we open it, we can actually open it as an image, right? Store it even as an image. So we can either store and manage a copy of the current brush, or we can store the current the current brush here as an image, store as image. So now in here it has the RGB. It still has the alpha channel too, by the way. You could go and say, okay, I just want the alpha, right? Where's the replace alpha, right? So you do actually get that selection mask that came from the brush. You do get that saved away here too, and then when you place it in here, it's going to be showing just like that, which is interesting because you could then also go and paint it in, or you could go and paint something else on top of that, right? Make something totally different out of that. It could be, for instance, to paint some thick oil, and do something very different, or it could be that you want to emboss it by alpha. That's an interesting thing to do here, to give it a little bit of an appearance like some decals, vinyl stickers. Where do we have that? Under effects, emboss by alpha, right? Do that and you get a little bit of an embossed look to that. It's subtle, and it's sometimes a bit difficult to tell because we have the marching ants adding some noise to that. But you have other effects too. Look under the filters for stylize. You can stylize it with glowing edges. Plastic wrap, there's one probably. Yep, that will look a bit more like thick plastic vinyl decal stickers. Boy, that's a mouthful. And we have stylize, waxify. Where do they come up with these names? And so that itself you could again pick up as a new brush. So go and pick that up. And so now you have that in a brush. Actually, you might, let's go undo, and perhaps take only a portion of it. Right? So you could go, while the alpha channel is still there, let's see, or is it? There. While the alpha channel is there, you could say, yeah, let's go and grab the custom brush pickup tool right here, and maybe I'm interested in only the upper part of the tree. Right, so I could go from here, drag it up, and pick this much, and now I have just that part, and I can preview it when I'm using the brush tool. I can see it, and you can see that you have just that part in the brush. So there's lots of ways to work with this to create new interesting trees or portions of trees. Let's explore one more technique, and that's to work with the original drawing. So if we go to enable this and draw another one of those trees, perhaps I want to try a different one. Let's erase this and reset it, and I'm going to pick, let's see some other trees here. These willows are somewhat similar, they're not all the same though, different sizes. Let's go and see what we have on tropical trees here. No, that's some tropical shrubbery. Simple tree 5. Those are too simple. We need something a bit more sophisticated. Shrub, evergreens, and those are, oh, there's lots of new ones on those. But I think what we'll do is maybe look at the classic trees. Nah, still too small. Well, maybe. I don't know. You know what? I think I'll just go back. I guess the first one was the best anyway, so let's just go back to Willow 1. There you go. I just love that. So how can we change that? First of all, remember this to disable the shading so it doesn't get so dark. Let it go into the shadows though. There you go. Alright, so how can we work with this to perhaps add a different color to it? Right. So well, if we once we've drawn it, we can certainly just use the filters like this one here. You got the adjust color. Right. Now there's two types of adjusting. One is the multiply mode and the other one is the add mode. And if you multiply it, it will multiply everything, including this background that's white. Now if you multiply more than what's already there, it cannot get any wider. But if you reduce it, you can see that you can reduce the red, and now there's only green and blue, which gives you that cyan background. So be aware of that. But it certainly it's an interesting way to give that tree some additional detail and variation on the coloring. Right. And if you don't care about the background, that's fine. Or if you need the background to simply be ignored, you make it transparent, meaning you slap that alpha channel here, create alpha on top of that, right? So create alpha is checked, then you erase, then you draw your tree, then you let go, and you wait, and now you have the selection mask, and now the filter is only going to apply on that selected part on the tree. So you can go now and reduce the alpha, and you see the tree change, not reducing the alpha, reducing the color, and you can see that it's reducing or changing the color on the leaves, on the tree branches, but it's not changing anything on the background because that one's not selected. You can also go to adding and add some way too much color there, or reduce it. Lots of different ways to work with this. Let's see. There was one other way that I thought we could also explore. Oh yeah, and that's actually to go to the root of the problem, and that's a nice pun intended. We're talking about trees. Going to the root means essentially, well, first of all, you could apply some tinting, right? So there is a color cue here. There is tinting. Let's say if we say green. Yeah, everything kind of takes a greenish tint, right? Now it's not totally dominant, but you can give it a bluish tint. Oh wait, I need to change my selection mask here. Control D to clear that. Shift K to kill it. There you go. So now we have a bluish tint. Right? It still does the ambient lighting to that. Let's do without the alpha. Let's for now, right now we'll do without the alpha. So erase that. There you go. So if I give it a light blue tint, everything gets multiplied by this light blue color. If I give it a purple or a pink tint, it gets a bit more of a pinkish color. Very subtle difference here in the end. If I give it yellow, maybe it's a little bit stronger. Well, you know, it's already got plenty of yellow in that orange there, so it's not going to add a lot. If you take some darker ones, though, it's going to do that. So you want to also work with color cue. That's another one. So color cue is where you can have additional coloring based on, I think it's based on the distance, like a depth cue. So you have some other parameters to explore here. I guess ambient amount, that's another one also. You can, that's more of an additive amount. So you can see with that, if you give it, let's say, ambient color, kind of a yellowish or maybe a bluish tint, that will make it cooler looking. And you have very little ambient amount, looks like that. Okay, then you increase it to about halfway, looks like that. Now it's still going to do the shading, there you go. And now much higher, and you can see how it's starting to look quite different now. And then we'll do perhaps one more here at full ambient amount. There you go. So that's actually really good to keep in mind if you have a very foggy appearance and you want to kind of make the trees look like they're far away in that fog and disappearing to that fog color. Right. What else? What else? We have ambient, we have diffuse light. Okay, that would be a little bit of controlling on the lighting. So if we give it 1.0 here, we might get a slightly different appearance. Not hugely different here. There are a lot of other things, but if you make it too much, it'll probably be too bright, or not. So there's pen size also. So what's the pen size? Well, you know, it's essentially these particles that are flying around here as you drag the mouse. These branches right here, the leaves that you see on them, they are controlled by a certain size, the pen size. So if you want them very thin, you put them down to 1, and you'll see it draw a little bit faster too, but it will be a much thinner appearance, just generally speaking. Look like a very thin piece of foliage, right? Whereas if you give it a pen size of 2, we're back to where we were a little bit before, it looks a little bit heavier, right? And then if you look at maybe 3, 4, 5, it'll be huge. There you go, very heavy branches, heavy leaves, and so on. So you can play with that as well. Let's do something like a pen size of, I don't know, if you take 0.1. Oh yeah, very thin. Now that's like super thin. That's like the type of thin where you really just have a hint of it. You know, you barely see it. 0.4 might be a little bit more reasonable. Right, and then what else? Well, after all, when you look at these branches, let me bring it back to a 2.1 or something like that. When we use these these foliage brushes, there's really several stages. There's a thick trunk, thick branches, medium-sized branches, and then it splits again into thinner branches, and eventually splits into twigs, and then eventually it splits into those branches going down, which split into additional leaves, and some of them have even more. So there are rules for all of those, and it's a rule-based particle system at that. And you can see the rules library right there. So for that particular tree, I'm not sure how many rules there are, but you can see rule number 1, rule number 2. You can go through all of these, and all the parameters load until you hit one that doesn't have anything, like this one. Rule number 10 is not used. You could have a rule number 10 for additional content, like maybe little flowers on top of the trees, on top of the leaves, or some other type of leaves. So what you may want to do is see if any of these have, you might want to change something else. Like, for instance, let's take a look at rule number 9. There's a checkbox here, right? Emit count, branch lifespan 1. If you check age, what's that gonna do? Well, let's give it a try. Let's find out. Yeah, I'm not sure I can tell. I would have thought that maybe the leaves, if these are the leaves, that they would gradually get smaller, but maybe that's not what that controls. Anyway, there's plenty of exploration you can do here. There's following the mouse also. So with that, if you go a little bit zigzag, they may go, zigzag with you with the mouse. Maybe it needs a bit more. Let's try 5. Yeah, this one does really need much more than that. But you'll see a couple of parameters. Let's see number 8. What do we have for 8? Let's try the age decrement there. That looks a little bit different. And you can see now it shows fewer of the leaves, right? So now, I think that's one. I think I just hit it where the leaves are controlled by this rule, number 8. And so if I let's do a side by side. I'm going to do one without the age. That's probably an age decrement, basically. Okay, so now we have the regular tree. And then I'm going to enable age decrement and do about the same. And see if we can tell sort of a difference between them. So yeah, you can definitely see the leaves here are kind of still very regular. They come down and they alternate, always about the same size, right? And whereas especially along that twig, if you look at that twig, there's not much variation along it. The leaves are there and they're there, and that's about it. Whereas over here, they kind of look like they're starving off, they're dying off, right? They're not all at the same, they don't have the same presence all along it. And so that's the thing, they're shorter, they have this age decrement happening to them. And that gives it just yet another appearance. Look at how different those two trees are. So we can go back to perhaps looking at the coloring. What was it? Ambient. Let's keep the ambient bright. That's very bright here. Let's keep. That's too much. Yeah, that's definitely too much. So I'm going to keep it a bit more on the darkish side and reduce the ambient. Yeah, look at that. So many more colors starting to show up. And then also the tinting. That's way too much tinting. Let's give it a bit more like this. Okay. And then one thing also that you'll keep in mind is that it keeps accumulating on top of the other trees. So the darkening due to the ambient lighting is also showing. Right? It's a cumulative thing. It has a Z buffer. These trees are painted into 3 dimensions. So when you clear, it clears the Z buffer too. But when you start, so you start off from scratch, and you can have 2 trees next to each other. But if they overlap, they'll start producing even darker parts around them. So here in the middle, you see it's darker because there's already some darkness from the left tree and from the right tree. So if you do a bouquet of flowers, for instance, with lots of grass helms and that kind of thing, it's gonna get darker and darker. So really nice to create some creepy forest or something like that. Alright, so I think that will get us started creating some new content for our beautiful scenic views with the mountains in the background and some trees in the foreground. Alright, thanks for watching.